Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we come to the conclusion of one of my favorite Spawn miniseries with Medieval Spawn Witchblade number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in June of 1996, we see here a cover that I believe is really the weakest of the 3 covers in this miniseries. There's nothing inherently wrong with the artwork. I think the artwork is fantastic. My problem lies in the fact that I don't really feel as though this cover portrays that this book is the climax of this story featuring the grand final battle between good and evil. It just seems very blasé in some aspects. If you look at the covers of issues number 1 and 2, they were far more dynamic in their presentation, whereas this one, everyone's just kind of standing around. It's just a very odd choice to use this image for the cover of the book that's supposed to bring the whole story to a conclusion. Written by Garth Ennis. Penciled by Brandon Peterson, pages 1 through 12. Billy Tan Mung Khoi, I believe is how you're supposed to say that, pages 17 through 24. Michael Turner, pages 13 and 14. Anthony Wynn, pages 15 and 16. Inked by Bat, pages 1 through 9 and also 11. D. Tron, pages 13, 14, and 17 through 24. Brandon Peterson, pages 10 through 12. Aaron Sode, I believe is how you say that name, 15 and 16. Colored by Ashby Manson. Computer colored by Richard Eisenov, Tyson Wengler, Catherine Birch, Dean White, Nick Kozis, I believe, possibly, Teresa Bellman, Dennis Heisler, letters, David Wohl, editor, Michelle Utron, associate editor, Victor Lamas and Jose Gillian, maybe, perhaps, I'm not sure, ink assist. Peter Steigerwald is banned from the realm. Raul Arroyo and Mary Buxton are chained up in the dungeon. I don't know what any of that means, and holy crap, that was a lot of names. There were a ton of people who were responsible for getting this book out, which leads me to believe that they may have been running behind schedule and were very pressed for time. That's only an assumption, so I could be wrong, but that's what it seems like to me. The story picks up exactly where we left off, as we find out that the battle is not going well for Lord Cardinale and his forces of darkness, as one of his subordinates is exclaiming to him that they should retreat, as the woman and the knight have already killed 100 of his men and have not displayed any signs of slowing down. However, Lord Cardinale refuses to accept this as he grabs his minion by the throat and starts choking it to death. However, at this point, Lady Eleanor comes up behind him and tries to reason with him on the same level, telling him that she discovered from Royale that the woman wields the Witchblade, which is a weapon capable of potentially standing up to and fighting the forces of darkness, and perhaps is even equal to his own power. However, Cardinale refuses to listen to Eleanor as well, stating that they've come all this way and are now in the capital, and he refuses to admit defeat when they're so close to their ultimate goal. We then get this fantastic full-page splash of Katarina and Spawn laying waste to the forces of darkness, as Cardinale exclaims that he refuses to be beaten by 2 mortals, which I find interesting, as while Katarina is very much a mortal human and simply just happens to have a very powerful magical weapon at her disposal, Spawn is indeed immortal at this point, and it seems as though Royale would have explained this to Cardinale, but perhaps he was trying to downplay Spawn's relevance as a means of serving his own needs. And speaking of serving his own needs, we then join Royale in the top of the tower as he vigorously searches for a particular item, as he states he can't seem to find it when Stalker comes around the corner and says, "Oh, you can't find what? I thought you were supposed to be neutralizing all these magical items, but it doesn't seem like you're doing that to me." Realizing that he's been found out, Royale tells Stalker that if he wants to live, he should leave, but it makes no difference to him whether he lives or dies, and there's nothing at this point that Stalker can do to interrupt his plans. Stalker then tells him that he never trusted him from the start, and that despite Royale being very certain of himself, he's very much here to try and put a damper on things as he unleashes a bolt from his crossbow aimed directly at Royale's head. Also, I really like the idea that this magical treasure room is filled with a lot of items from other pop culture. Obviously, we have a Green Lantern here, as well as a Green Lantern ring. We also get the mask from the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask, as well as Darth Vader's helmet and Boba Fett's helmet and a few others that I'm sure I'm missing. But I really do... Oh, and R2-D2 down here. I missed him for sure. But I really think that this was like a funny little joke to add into this panel, and it's something that continues on further into the story. However, Royale turns and grabs the bolt directly out of midair. This absolutely stuns Stalker, and then Royale casts some sort of magical enchantment on the bolt and throws it back at Stalker. The bolt explodes in midair and launches Stalker out through a nearby window. As Stalker falls to the ground, he screams in terror, begging for someone to help him. Spawn holds out his hands and catches Stalker, and then asks him what the hell he's doing. Stalker tells him and Katarina that they've been betrayed and that Royale is up to something. As Royale witnesses all of this, he says it's of no consequence as nothing can stop him now, as he's found exactly what he was looking for. We then see that the object that Royale had been searching for this entire time was in fact a large magical mirror of some sort. He uses his own powers to activate the mirror and commands the mirror to tell him when the apocalypse will happen. The mirror gives him the date October 2nd, 1996 AD. Unfortunately for Royale, this poses a bit of a problem as this date is 800 years in the future. He then commands the mirror to tell him how he can live long enough to see this happen, and seems very satisfied by the answer, though we don't get let in on exactly what that answer is just yet. And as I stated before, we get some more pop culture references here, as this room also seems to contain Mjolnir, the magic lasso of Wonder Woman, the helmet of fate, and Doctor Strange's flight cloak. Which I still am very amused by this. I like when they put in little like Easter egg stuff like this into comic books. Even though there's not really a whole lot of humor in this book, I feel like this kind of stuff is just kind of a little je ne sais quoi, if you will. Meanwhile, at the battle taking place at the base of the tower, we see that things are not boding well for Lord Cardinale and his darkness forces, as Lady Eleanor exclaims they have but 30 warriors left and pleads with her lord to retreat. Realizing that his forces are no match for the combined might of both Spawn and the Witchblade, Cardinale finally concedes and commands his forces to retreat so that they can regroup. However, this interferes with Royale's new plans, and he needs to come up with a way to keep Cardinale here, so he quickly devises a plan and casts a spell to infect the mind of Katarina. This causes her to lose control over the Witchblade as she crumples to her knees and starts to get up slowly. Spawn asks her what is wrong, however, instead of responding, Katarina immediately turns around and attacks Spawn. This catches him completely off guard as he tries to reason with her and stop her from attacking, while also not trying to harm her. He begs her to stop, stating, "Katarina, please, you have to quit." However, Katarina's only response is, "I'm not Katarina, I am Witchblade," as she continues her onslaught. Of course, Lady Eleanor and Lord Cardinale are quite shocked at seeing these two warriors now fighting one another, as Eleanor states, "Well, I guess we just caught a break," and Cardinale says, "Yeah, go ahead, you stupid fools. Kill each other. I'm totally fine with that." As Katarina continues her relentless assault, Spawn desperately tries to reason with her, telling her that she doesn't know what she's doing. He then decides to go for broke as Katarina stands above him, and he realizes that she's going to kill him if he doesn't do something to stop her. He tells her that they have a past and that they met 7 years before he was like this and was just a man, and that they were in fact lovers. This catches Katarina off guard and suddenly snaps her out of her rage. She then grabs her head and begins to focus, concentrating all of her will on controlling the Witchblade, telling the Witchblade that it's not the one calling the shots as she raises her hand above her head and exclaims, "I'm in charge." Trying to make sense of what he's just witnessed, Stalker asks Katarina what happened. We then learn that Royale's spell was not cast upon her, but upon the Witchblade itself. He used his magic to amplify the powers of the Witchblade, which caused it to take control over Katarina's mind. However, after regaining control, she tells him that's not going to happen again. Meanwhile, Spawn, after realizing that he has let the cat out of the bag in terms of their backstory, tries to say something, but he's immediately cut off when Katarina tells him it will have to wait, as they have other business to attend to. Now that our heroes have regrouped, the pair of Lord Cardinale and Lady Eleanor realize that they have to make their final stand and prepare themselves for battle. Eleanor tries to remind Cardinale of the apparent danger of facing off against the Witchblade, telling him once again to heed the warnings that she heard from Royale that the Witchblade may be able to be his undoing. However, this falls on deaf ears as he tells Eleanor to hell with the bloody Witchblade, these two are going to die. At this point, Spawn tells Cardinale to prepare himself for the final voyage that he will be taking as he plans on killing Cardinale, and Cardinale tells him to bring it. Lady Eleanor then tells Katarina that she refuses to be defeated by this woman and that this day will be her end. Katarina tells her to shut up and fight, and the battle between the four immediately ensues. However, it takes very little time for both Katarina and Spawn to immediately gain the upper hand, as they seem to be more than a match for the combined might of Cardinale and Eleanor. And as the two falter and face death, they call out to each other for the other's help, which I think is kind of a funny little thing to happen right here at the end of the page as they're both being bested. They're like, hey, help me. No, you help me. It's a subtle bit of humor, but I think it works well in this situation. Faced with his ultimate demise, Lord Cardinale decides to go for broke as he commands all of the darkness powers back to himself. We then see long tendrils start to emerge from his body. However, this bodes poorly for Lady Eleanor as she looks at her hand, watching it begin to crack. She then starts to break apart as she pleads with Lord Cardinale to not do this, as calling all of the darkness powers to himself will destroy not only his army but also her, as she begs him not to send her back to the eternal darkness of nothingness, and pleads with him that she not be destroyed. As she begins to panic while she watches her body break apart, she is suddenly contacted telepathically by Royale. Royale tells her that he can save her using his magic, and she begs him to do so. But upon hearing this, Royale begins to tell her something that may not bode well for her. As he states, "Do you remember when I was at your mercy, when I had to beg you for help? You taught me a very valuable lesson that day. And from now on, I will never again be at someone else's mercy and have to beg, not for the rest of my life. And for teaching me that lesson, I will give you a very special reward, eternal imprisonment." He then tells her to rot, as we see that he has sent her to perhaps wherever the darkness originates from, or just some other plane, but with her body full intact, locked in a seemingly and apparently unbreakable cell that she will have to spend the rest of eternity in. Meanwhile, having called all of the powers of the darkness back to himself, Lord Cardinale begins to gain the upper hand, ensnaring both Katarina and Spawn with his new tendrils. He then begins to mock them both, stating that the powers of the darkness are in fact supreme. As Katarina struggles against the tendrils, trying to remain conscious, she herself mocks the Witchblade, stating, a lot of help you turned out to be. However, this seems to get under the Witchblade's skin as it once again produces her bladed weapon. She immediately uses the weapon to free herself and then Spawn, as Cardinale begins to grow more angry as he states, "This is impossible. This weapon is not more powerful than my powers of darkness." However, as Katarina raises her weapon above her head, committed to inflicting the final blow, she states to Lord Cardinale, "It's not the weapon, it's the wielder, you wimp," which I think is a funny little thing to add in, kind of once again highlighting the idea that Katarina is more than a little bit rough around the edges, so it plays kind of perfectly into her character. Katarina then charges forward and plunges her blade straight through the chest of Lord Cardinale, running him through. As she removes her blade, Lord Cardinale falls, but as he does so, he calls her a whore. This enrages Spawn, who immediately beheads him and tells him to shut his mouth. With the battle now won, the two of them try to regroup, as Katarina states that she can't find Royale anywhere. Spawn looks out upon the city of Belgardale and is quite upset by the level of devastation, stating that the city will never again be the same. They are then joined once again by Stalker, who now has a large sack over his shoulder. Spawn asks exactly what he's been doing and what he has there, and Stalker tells him that it's a whole load of fairy gold. This is something that catches Spawn off guard, as he states, "You would loot this city?" Stalker, however, makes the counter-argument that everyone in the city is now dead and now have absolutely no use for any of this treasure. He then tells Spawn that the only reason that he and Katarina even tagged along in the first place was to get their hands on all this gold. Katarina, however, looks down at the Witchblade gauntlet and tells Stalker that she seems to have found something more valuable than just treasure, but then tells him that she could use a stiff drink and wants to go home. She then looks at Spawn and tells him that he has some explaining to do. After the trio leave, Royale comes out of hiding and finds the now decapitated head of Lord Cardinale. He states that while this wasn't the way he envisioned he'd be able to get his hands on Cardinale's power, it will in fact suffice. We are then teleported back to New York City in 1996 and the park bench where all of this story began. Royale continues to recant this tale, stating that everything has worked out perfectly for him, that he not only learned when the apocalypse would happen, but he also lived long enough to see it, as he reaches into the cardboard box that he's been talking to the entire time. He then pulls out the disembodied head of Lord Cardinale, which was inside of the box, and states that everything has worked out exactly to his plan. We learn that Royale has actually been siphoning the powers of the darkness from Cardinale's disembodied head for centuries, using this magic to stop his aging and effectively make himself immortal. He then tells Cardinale that he is so excited that he's going to be able to witness the apocalypse in 6 months' time, and that he's happy that Cardinale will be here to see it with him. Cardinale, unamused by this, states, "Yeah, you never really get tired of telling me this story, do you?" Royale responds by stating, "No, why should I?" However, Cardinale then asks a very specific question. He tells Royale, "You've always left out one part. You've never said what happened to the Witchblade and the Hellspawn." Royale responds by asking, "Why does it matter? They've been dead for centuries. At this point, it's an irrelevant part of the story." However, Cardinale says, "Please, I need to know," and assumingly giving him some sort of pity, Royale decides to tell him that part of the story. Perhaps this has to do with the fact that they've spent the last 800 years together, and Royale may in fact be somewhat fond of Cardinale at this point. Also, I find it really odd that he's just transporting Cardinale's disembodied head around in a cardboard box. It seems as though he would have perhaps found something a bit more substantial or ergonomic to carry this thing around with him, especially given the level of importance that the head has, as it's the key to his quote-unquote immortality and staying alive long enough to witness the apocalypse. We are then teleported 800 years into the past as Spawn begins to recant the tale of his meeting with Katarina 7 years prior to this. He tells her of a time when he was traveling the Mediterranean and stopped in at a port in Italy. This is where he met Katarina at a tavern, and the two of them spent the whole night together, as he was quite enamored with her, stating he had never met a woman like her before. As the night went on and the two of them got drunk, his inhibitions were lowered, and the two of them spent the entire night making love under the stars. The next day he awoke to see that she was gone, and they never saw each other after that. Katarina begins to remember this tale as she's getting an elbow from Stalker, and at this point, Spawn accidentally sticks his foot in his mouth, stating, "Yes, it was because of our love that you were able to triumph over the Witchblade." This immediately snaps Katarina out of it as she says, "Wait a second. I triumphed over the Witchblade on my own. It wasn't because of you or our love together. It was simply because of me. You get it?" Realizing that he may have overstepped, Spawn begins to backpedal, stating, "Oh, I just thought that we..." And Katarina immediately cuts him off, telling him that while they did have fun together, this was a one-off thing and that he's taking it way too seriously. She then asks him Why exactly did you keep all of this a secret from me? Why didn't you tell me before? Spawn explains, well, I'm not the same man today as I was back then. Katerina asks what he means, but he tells her that it's really not important now, which once again kind of plays into the idea that I believe this story is happening after the one that we learned from the Violator in the issues of Spawn number 14 and 15 in the mainline Spawn story, where the Violator was telling of his battle with Medieval Spawn. This all seems to be happening at a much later date than that, although we don't know exactly the timeline when it comes to all of that. Meanwhile, back in New York City in 1996, Lord Cardinale is quite happy to hear about this as he chuckles to himself, stating, "So, the Hellspawn was heartbroken. I really like that." Royale then tells him, well, if you like that, you're going to love this part. We then see Medieval Spawn riding off on his horse as Katerina says, really, the sad bastard's just going, I guess. But Stalker just shrugs his shoulders. Katerina asks him what's wrong, and Stalker states, I've been trying to, get together with you for quite some time, and you just keep giving me the cold shoulder. Meanwhile, this guy just had to get you drunk, and you just jumped into his arms. Katerina plays it off, stating, well, he didn't quite look the same back then, but then realizes that she hasn't been giving Stalker a chance at all. She instead decides to go against her better judgment and give Stalker the chance he's been asking for. She tells him, you're no oil painting, but let's go back, we'll count up all of our treasure, and I'll let you buy me a drink. Stalker completely takes this to mean that she's madly in love with him, as he says, she told me I was attractive. This means that she's really into me and she's going to let me buy her a drink. We're going to shag tonight for sure, as he follows behind her eagerly. As Katerina begins to open up the sack filled with gold, she asks Stalker how much he thinks is in there. He responds by telling her that it must be at least 20 or 30,000. However, when Katerina reaches into the sack, she pulls out nothing but a handful of lead. This causes Stalker to look terrified as he realizes that everything he stole was fairy gold, which means when they bring it back to their world, it transforms into lead. This immediately enrages Katerina as she states, you mean we spent all that time doing all that fighting and nearly dying on multiple occasions for nothing but lead? She then holds up her clenched fist, donning the Witchblade, and asks Stalker, do you know what I'm going to do with this? As we reach the end of the story. Now, I'd like to point out, too, that Stalker, given his size and stature, would never have been able to carry a sack filled with gold, much less lead. This weight would have been incredible, and this is something that I see happening in a lot of fantasy stuff quite frequently amongst pop culture, be it movies or video games or comic books. They always act as though treasure, and specifically gold, has like no weight. Take a game like Skyrim, for instance. Your currency is gold coins, meaning that if your character is carrying around 10,000 gold coins, they should not be able to walk. However, the money never actually has any weight on your incumbency, which is, I understand, kind of important to gameplay, but at the same time, it doesn't make any sense if you think about it for more than 3 seconds. We then get an advertisement for Top Cow, who was going to be at the San Diego Comic-Con in July of 1996. If you happen to stop by the booth in 96 and talk to the guys at Top Cow, feel free to talk about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more about it. We then get to the results of the Top Cow medieval contest that accompanied this miniseries, where readers were asked to submit their own original artworks of Top Cow characters reimagined as medieval characters to win a whole prize package involving signed artwork and signed copies of the variant cover of issue number 1. It was a pretty cool contest. And here we see the first, second, and third place winners. First place went to Michael J. Windsor with this honestly really cool rendition of Killjoy as a medieval warrior. He really knocked it out of the park, and in my opinion, they really made the right choice in giving him the win. Second place went to Rudolph Gianodin, I believe is how you say that, from Burbank, California, who submitted Velocity as a court jester. This also is really cool. I like the entire premise of this and think it's a really neat idea. It's just, when you hold it up next to this one of Killjoy, it is clear that the Killjoy one deserved the first place finish. And third place went to Frankie Washington of Boston, Massachusetts, with his rendition of Carnal. I don't know who this character is. I'll be the first to admit, I'm not super well versed in a lot of the extended Top Cow universe and characters, and I'm not certain exactly what comic book this character is from, though admittedly, he is pretty well drawn here, and I think this is a really cool image as well. And honestly, I really think that second and third place could have been swapped, and that would have been perfectly acceptable. I just really think that the first place winner they nailed. Like, this guy absolutely deserved to get first place. We then get a page of honorable mentions, the first being Stryker as a medieval warrior by Michael Gibbs from Springfield Gardens, New York. The second is of Ripclaw as a medieval warrior from Sengekri Chor. I have got to be 100% mispronouncing your name. I do apologize. From Hawaiian Gardens, California. The third being of Stryker as a Viking, which is pretty cool, from Mario Montez of Sonora, California. And the final of Velocity as a milkmaid saying "Got milk" from Ken Christensen in Seattle, Washington. This, of course, being in reference to the Got Milk ad campaign that was going on at this time. We then get an advertisement for 9-Volt. I have never in my life seen an issue of this comic book or any rendition of this character outside of this advertisement. I have never come across it in dollar boxes in any of the years I've been hunting through comic books. And I actually am really curious as to what this comic was about, and I would actually like to get my hands on it at some time in the future just to know more about this, what I can only assume, super obscure character from Top Cow. We then get 2 more pages worth of 9-Volt advertisement featuring this large 4-armed character whose name I don't know, along with some pencil and inks of the interior of the book. All of this looks really cool, and I think the artwork is really good, and it makes me really want to track down some of these books because I would definitely like to know more about 9-Volt. We then reach the end of the 9-Volt advertisement and find out that this comic book was written by Cliff Sun and penciled by Anthony Chun, and that the design of what I can only assume to be the main character was by Raul Rayo. Now, this looks really cool to me, and I would love to get my hands on issues of 9-Volt to make videos about them in the future, so I'm going to have to really keep my eyes out because, as I stated before, I have never in my life seen any issues of this comic book ever in all of my travels and digging endlessly through dollar books. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the cyberforce.com interactive website. This website had a Cyberforce game on it that was supposed to tie into the Cyberforce story. I don't know if this is the case. I never had any experience with this website because, as you can see, this was in 1996, and my family didn't gain internet access until 1999, so I obviously couldn't do any of this. Sucks for me. And that was Medieval Spawn Witchblade number 3. Overall, I think this was a decent book. My only real complaint is that I feel like the final battle between the Forces of Darkness and Witchblade and Medieval Spawn was over a little bit too quickly. I really believe that if they had not included the several pages of advertisement for 9-Volt at the end, they could have given a few more pages to that battle, and they didn't have to be anything special in terms of like story content, but you could have done maybe like one big 2-page splash that could have just been like a big time action sequence. I think that would have added more to the climax of this story. But other than that, I think the whole thing turned out really well. I like the idea of Katarina and Stalker kind of getting screwed over at the end and them getting their just desserts in terms of not being able to capitalize on their own greed. We also see the defeat of the darkness in the medieval age. And we also get, like, you know, a continuation of Medieval Spawn's story, though it's not quite over at the end of this miniseries. The one thing that was left open-ended was exactly what was going on with Royale and his infatuation with witnessing the apocalypse. I don't know if this played into a larger story in the Top Cow universe, but I don't recall it playing into anything larger in the mainline Spawn story, but that could just be something that I've forgotten that absolutely happened. But in any case, I really believe that this is a fantastic miniseries. As I've stated multiple times, this is one of my absolute favorite Spawn miniseries, and I was more than overjoyed to go back, read all 3 of these issues again, and make videos of them for you. But that being said, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Your opinion may be that this miniseries is awful, or that you thought that the battle between the forces of darkness, Medieval Spawn, and Witchblade was more than adequate and didn't need to be drawn out any further. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.